My name is Bernice L. McFadden, and I'm the author of the Book of Harlan. The Book of Harlan opens with the courtship of Harlan's parents at his 1917 birth in Macon, Georgia. After his grandfather dies, Harlan and his parents move to Harlem, where he eventually becomes a professional musician. When Harlan and his best friend, trumpeter Lizard Robbins, are invited at a popular cabaret in the Parisian enclave of Montmartre, referred to as the Harlem of Paris by Black American musicians, Harlan jumps at the opportunity, convincing Lizard to join him. But after the City of Lights falls under Nazi occupation, Harlan and Lizard are thrown into the notorious concentration camp in Weimar, Germany, changing the course of Harlan's life.
Book Lovers Unite. I'm Demetrius Jackson, and you're listening to the Chapter 1 podcast. The greatest stories ever written all begin with Chapter 1. In each episode, our guest authors will share their first chapters with you. Today, I'm speaking with an author who really needs no introduction. Bernice McFadden, best-selling author, award-winning author, critically acclaimed author. The list goes on. She's recently published an incredible story called The Book of Harlan, which actually talks about Black Holocaust victims. I didn't even know that was a thing. So I'm very happy to have her on to talk about this, because the older I get, the more I realize that there's just so much history that wasn't a part of our history classes. So we've got quite a lot to talk about, and it starts right now.
This is the section called Coming to America. Harlan falls in love with a woman named Gwendolyn, and this is the story of her parents coming from Barbados to America before Harlan and Gwen meet. Coming to America. Their new home was located in Brooklyn on a long east-west street called Fulton. The sidewalks teemed with peddlers hawking all manner of pickled things, jams, vegetables, freshly baked bread, and hard and soft cheeses. The street itself was a hazard. Daily, some unwitting pedestrian was mowed down by a horse and buggy, or a bicyclist, kid on a pogo stick, or trolley sneaking its way along the latticework of silver tracks. At night, when all other Brooklyn streets had been put to sleep, Fulton still sparked and sizzled with life. Marauding stray dogs, ravenous rats, and drunkards loudly serenading the street lamps. Located above a butcher shop, the apartment, originally intended for one family, was now rented out as rooms, accommodating 3 families. Their room was of average size, consisting of a pair of double beds, 1 chest of drawers, 1 closet, and a pale blue wooden rocking chair. The dull oak floors were pocked and dimpled with wear, and the once white walls were yellow with age and veined with cracks. At the center of the distended ceiling hung a single sputtering light bulb. Certainly not the home Ethel had hoped for. Aubrey saw disappointment sweep across his wife's face. He dropped his head, shoved his hands deep into the wells of his trouser pockets, and mumbled ashamedly, "It's just until we can do better." Ethel nodded, forced a smile, and heeded her mother's warning. "When you get there, I don't care if he's living in a box. You hold your tongue. No quarreling, you hear? You're lucky he's sending for you and the children. You see how many wives here without husbands? How many women here without men?" The lure of the American dollar had slowly emptied Barbados and her sister islands of most of their able-bodied men. Soon enough, the women left behind looked up from their bubbling pots of rice, from hands plunged deep into galvanized tubs of soapy water, up from the scaling of fish and the plaiting of hair, and were astonished to find that their men were all gone. On Thursday evenings and Sunday mornings, fingers banded in rings of Guyanese gold, the women filled church pews, babies propped on their laps, older children sitting at their hips, silently watching their mothers flip frantically through battered Bibles in search of a psalm that could provide comfort for a lonely soul awaiting the return of her man. At the end of the American harvesting and planting seasons, some Caribbean men did return, and those women who could steal away from work to meet the ships did. Clothed in vibrantly colored dresses and skirts, they swarmed the wharf like hungry rodents, congesting the air with their spirited chatter, perfume, and scented hair grease. For some, however, the joy was fleeting. Not all the men came home. Within weeks, the sad truth arrived by post, telegram, or the worst delivery of all, gossip, advising the waiting woman that she should pawn her wedding ring and get on with her life because he had gotten on with his in the land of the free and home of the brave. But not Ethel's husband, not Aubrey Gill. When his letter arrived, it contained American greenbacks and said, "Buy passage for you and the girls and come." So Ethel did as her mother told her, held her tongue as best she could, and set both feet in the well of gratitude. She looked at the four blank walls. No window? "It's just for a little while, Ethel," Aubrey repeated. Ethel bobbed her head thoughtfully. "Who in the other rooms?" Aubrey pointed at the wall to the left. "A family from Trinidad, husband, wife, daughter, and son." He aimed his chin to the right. "A couple from Haiti. A fine way to start a new life," she thought, pulling back the dull brown bedspread to examine the cleanliness of the sheets. She did not like Trinidadians. Her baby sister had married one. 3 years and two children later, she was running for her life. The husband hot on her heels, swinging a cutlass. Tricksterdadians, Ethel called those people. She reached for the pillow, raised it to her nose and sniffed. The Haitians would be another problem altogether. Black magic dabblers, voodoo practitioners fond of raising the dead, like Jesus Christ himself. Cross a Haitian on a Tuesday, wake up blind Wednesday morning, Ethel always said. She grunted and dropped the pillow onto the bed. She would be polite, but she would never call them friends. She and those women would never ever be Soli gals. If they happened in while she was preparing a meal, Ethel would offer them food, but she would never accept a grain of rice from any of them.
I mentioned earlier that you really need no introduction because your volume of work pretty much speaks for itself. Like Sugar, Loving Donovan, Glorious. Your books have been featured in Oprah's magazine. You've received shout outs from Terry McMillan, Alicia Keys, and thousands of readers around the world. And we haven't even gotten to your awards yet. Yet your writing career actually began pretty rough as you were balancing work and just trying to figure things out in general.
Absolutely. I would work all day and come home and be a mother to my daughter, put her down, and then write until 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning. I was so much younger then. I had so much more energy than I do now. But, because I was determined, and, rejection letter after rejection letter kept arriving in my mailbox. And I won't say that it wasn't, disturbing or frustrating. It was. But I really feel that with each rejection letter, it just fired me up more. It just really pushed me because I have this thing about showing folk when they're wrong.
Yeah.
Proving them wrong.
I think a lot of readers and writers who are experiencing a similar struggle probably all want to know, how are you able to get from there to here where you are now?
Well, it was, it's just, again, pure determination. in 1999, I received my first book deal. It was a 2-book deal. And I continued to receive multiple book deals on up until 2006, I believe, maybe 7. And then, the market crashed, and that changed everything. So huge advances, that's something of the past especially for new writers. The big writers, the big houses give the big writers big money. That's just the way it works. Yeah. Every now and again, though, you'll hear in the trades that some new writer received an extraordinary amount of money. Now, there's good and bad to that, I think. Because if you get all your money up front, it usually takes a very long time to cover that advance. So you may not get royalties.
Recoupable.
So I would say to an aspiring writer that it's okay to start out small and build your way up, because you have a lot to learn along the way. And I don't know if it's necessarily a good thing to start out on the top, because then where do you have to go beyond that? And, this industry really plays havoc with your emotions. We're all human beings. Rejection is not easy. So, I think if you start out at the top and you're receiving all these accolades, you're receiving all these awards, first thing that's going to happen is that next book, how are you going to top book 1 with book 2? That's a lot of pressure on yourself. And you don't need to put that pressure on yourself, because the industry is already going to put that pressure on you.
Absolutely.
So the other thing is, it used to be that we were completely dependent, we as authors completely dependent on our marketing and sales teams at the publishing houses. We can't do that anymore. You have to take the bull by the horns, and you have to take possession of your marketing and sales and be out there basically shoving your book in everyone's face. Now, whether that is actually physically or virtually via social networks, people have to know about your book. They have to know about your product. So you have to engage your audience.
Yeah, I've been writing professionally now for a couple of years, and that's something that I experienced as well, thinking, I'm going to publish a book and then end up on Oprah's couch, as every author envisions. And it just does not work that way. For me, because I have a technical media background, I was able to, kind of, as you say, grab the bull by the horns with the technical side and just kind of push my books forward. But I found the biggest challenge, even more so than finding my voice, was trying to find my specific audience for what I write. And social media, I think, does help a lot with that.
Absolutely. Because everybody knows someone.
Yeah.
So, you heard about this book, and word of mouth is still the most powerful form of advertising, I believe. You see all these underground hits. Like, well, I've never even heard about that. And it's on the New York Times. How did that happen? People were talking. You didn't need to see a full-page ad in a newspaper or a magazine. People they enjoyed what they read, and they told a friend, and a friend told a friend, and that's how it goes.
Exactly.
And then the publishers see it, then that's what happens. Then the major publishers come looking for you.
Yeah, and that's never a bad position to be in.
Oh, not at all. That's a lovely position to be in.
Yeah. So let's talk about the Book of Harlan. Before I heard you speak at SMU the other week, I had no idea that there were Black Holocaust victims, though it makes sense that there would be, especially the way that you tell the story of how Harlan, a Black man, ended up in, is it Buchenwald?
Buchenwald, yes.
How did you first discover this hidden history, and what compelled you to write about it?
Well, I went to a book signing in Brooklyn back in 2004, I believe it was. And this gentleman had self-published a book called Germany's Black Holocaust. So, of course, my attendance went right up. And he talked about it. I was fascinated. I purchased the book. I went home and read it from beginning to end, and I could not get those images out of my head. And I was like, well, yes, it makes perfect sense, but how come no one talks about this? And I started doing a little research just to, resolve my own curiosity. And the more I looked into it, the more I felt that there was a story there. And I didn't know how I was going to approach it. So it kind of simmered for a few years. In the meantime, I continued on with my genealogy research. I've been researching my paternal line for 20 years. So when I finally decided that I was ready to tackle this book, I wasn't really clear on the main character. I had his name, not the name that he ends up with. I started out with a completely different name. And, I'm writing the story. I'm writing around the character, not really writing about him yet, because I'm not real familiar with him. And at some point, it just occurred to me, wait a minute, you have someone that you can use. And it was my grandfather, because I had been doing a lot of research about him. And I said, well, I have all of this information. I have fully fleshed out a man here that I could simply insert in this story. And that's what I did. So my grandfather's name was Harold, and I didn't think the Book of Harold was sexy enough. So I said, well, we'll name him to Harlan, because actually my stepfather was from Harlan, Kentucky. So I said, we'll name the book the Book of Harlan.
In what ways is the character of Harlan similar and different from your grandfather?
Well, they're both musicians. The difference, I guess it's easier to list the differences because they're very much alike. The difference is my grandfather did not go to Europe as a musician. He didn't go to Europe at all. Died as a fairly young man in the 50s, the late 50s. Harlan's life carries on through the 70s. And I think that's how they differ.
What's interesting to me is that by telling Harlan's story, you're also revealing the stories of many people's experiences during that time. What were your emotions as you were uncovering all of these facts and events and ultimately imagining the scenes that are within your book?
I love researching so much. I really do. It's thrilling for me whenever I uncover something that I've been looking for, or stumble across something I had no idea existed. There have been many moments where I sit here just kind of teary-eyed, always completely grateful for the information. It's an emotional roller coaster, I will say that.
I can imagine. What were some of the challenges that you had to work through?
As a writer, you want to make the scenes as authentic as possible. The Harlem of Paris, I was actually there in 2006. This is 2 years after I read about the Black Holocaust victims. I didn't realize, though, that I was actually in that place until last year sometime, right before I finished the book. And I think I put a post up on Facebook. I was like, oh my goodness, I was actually in that particular neighborhood some years earlier. So I like, can I remember the energy, how it felt? What did I see? That, along with just doing my research online and reading books, you want people who are familiar with that place to read the Book of Harlan and go, wow, she spent a lot of time there. That would be one of the challenges, I think.
Yeah. I also have to consider, from my perspective, I could not conceive of writing a story like this. It just isn't in me. So I guess that's what I'm marveling at.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, we don't know we don't even really know what we possess. You can make that statement. Could I have written this book at the beginning of my career? Maybe not. I think we grow into things. We mature as we become more familiar with our art and with our talent and with our gifts.
Is the completed book what you originally wanted it to be, or were you just kind of going with the flow?
I always go with the flow. I mean, I might have in my head a beginning and an ending, but never anything that I am completely committed to, because I know from my experience that it never ends up that way. So this is another reason why I don't outline, because then I would feel obligated in some weird way to follow what I already have down on paper. So I don't write. I write out of chronological order. I just write whatever I wake up that day, whatever I feel, whatever I see. That's what I put on paper.
That's interesting.
And it does not necessarily have to be chapter 3. Doesn't have to necessarily follow chapter 2. I'll label it as chapter 3, but it may have nothing at all to do with what happened in the previous scene.
So you're basically just creating the pieces as they come to you, and then you just fit them together into, I guess, a logical story, or maybe it just comes together on its own.
No, I then, when I'm done, when I emptied out all of my words, I then sit down and piece the novel together like a puzzle. You know, there's cutting and editing and cutting and pasting. There's a lot of that.
Yeah. That's amazing, actually. I don't know too many people who do that. That's very unique. Yeah, unique in a good way, In fact, you've written a pretty amazing and unique story, especially, and again, the story is amazing to me because this is just a subject that I was never taught in school. And, it just makes me wonder, as people are reading this, given the current climate in our country right now, has the story received any pushback from certain communities, or is it being well received by the people who are reading it?
I've not received any pushback. In fact, I received a really lovely letter from a veteran, a U.S. veteran, and he thanked me, a white man, thanked me for writing this story. And he compared himself to Lizard, the character in the Book of Harlan. And he was just very appreciative that this story was out there. Now, this is a veteran, somebody who had, had these experiences. Someone asked me yesterday, basically posed the same question: have I received any pushback from certain, and I'm air quoting certain organizations? And I'm like, no, because you know what? Nobody owns this story. And there are so many layers to this story. We've only heard one. And there are thousands of stories that come out of that period. So let's tell it. Let's embrace it all.
Well, I'm glad I was in the right place at the right time to hear you actually do this reading at SMU, because otherwise I still wouldn't know about it.
Oh, well, yeah, I'm glad you were there too.
What lessons do you want people to understand within the story?
I always want people to finish one of my historical novels and then go and do research. I want people, I'm trying to broaden the consciousness of my readers. It's so frustrating to me that we're all so ignorant of the truths that have been, obviously whitewashed or completely erased. And we can't just take everything for granted because I was taught that at school. I have these conversations with my students now to see, when you present them with the evidence, the astonishment, sometimes the anger in their eyes. It's really kind of mind-blowing. So that's what I want my books to ignite: a conversation, ignite a dialogue. And just pull back the veil.
I hear you. And it actually, what you're saying reminds me, I guess it was a few weeks ago, from Roland Martin. He was talking about Birth of a Nation. And he was saying how, it would be great if we could embrace these stories. I mean, like, we shouldn't let Hollywood tell our stories. And so we're going to
Mm-hmm.
tell them from the perspective that we know. And it's
Yes, exactly.
it's one of the reasons why I started this podcast, is because I wanted to promote, other authors, of course, but also when I come across a book like yours, I want people to know about it, because this was heavy when I went home and I thought about it, because I had never in my life even conceived of a Black Holocaust. And I'm from DC, where the Holocaust Museum is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, maybe, see, and this is what happens. So maybe folk will read the book, go to the museum and say, wait a minute, hey, there's something missing here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think I told you, I did tell you in email how I was watching the Beatles footage and I had no idea that Billy Preston was on the rooftop with them playing the piano. No clue.
See?
Yeah.
See, it's just, I know. I mean, I know we could go on for hours.
So I only have one other question for you, and I was
Okay.
purposely saving this one for last. What advice would you give to the younger Bernice who was first sitting down to write Sugar?
Oh, I think about that all the time. Sugar, I believe it took me so long to get her published, not just because of the climate in publishing, but I was unwilling to allow my characters to tell their stories. I was pushing back. I'm going to say I was pushing back the spirit. Like I was fighting with that. I was like, this is not how it's supposed to go. This is not what I have in my head. And I look at those early drafts and they are horrible. They are horrible. And it was once I let go and let God, then that's when that finished product appeared. Like when I just said, okay, this is my process, like the whole writing out of order. That's not how I started, because I didn't think that was the right way to write. So once I just surrendered, then it all worked out. So if I could go back to that younger version of myself, I would just tell her, chill. Like,
right?
just let it happen and it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
There's no wrong way to create your art.
Yeah. I need to print that out and hang it up on my door frame or something. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I very much enjoyed this.
Where can readers find you and your stories online?
Oh, okay. So BerniceMcFadden.com. That's my website. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. So just type my name in and I'll pop up somewhere.
All right. Sounds good. And with that, we'll wrap up another episode. Man, Bernice dropped some knowledge, didn't she? I'm always appreciative when an author comes on and speaks candidly about their writing process and about their thoughts and their feelings about the work that they create. So thanks again to Bernice for talking to us today. If you have any questions or comments about this episode or any, or an author who you think would be a good fit for the show, let me know. Connect with me on Facebook, the Twitter, Instagram, which I tend to forget about actually, or send an email to info@ch1podcast.com. That's it for me. Till next time.